Hey folks, if you're looking for an in-depth review, you're in the right place, and today I'm going to talk shop about Aetheric Games' Temple of Snek, which I received a review key for. Specifically, I'm going to delve deep into this arcade-inspired puzzler to ask the question, was this surprisingly solid, or did it induce a hissy fit? I'm your host Arlyeon, let's find out together. You are Snek. There are people to eat. You'll figure out why they seem so interested in the temple's gold along the way, and if this sounds a bit brusque, it's because Temple of Snek is a fairly story-light experience. To the point that I frequently had very little context for why I was rampaging around other than the small chapter summaries that crop up when you pause the game. That's not to say it's entirely devoid. You do get some contextual clues, given you can spot intruders looting the temple or pantomiming meetings between some NPCs as you slither onto the scene. That said, it is a very show-don't-tell experience. Even things like its environmental details that you can come across mirror that decision, such as the existence of your predecessors alongside some neat murals you encounter near the game's climax. And speaking on the game's climax, we'll tackle the ending later, after we go over the gameplay, since Temple of Snek has an altogether unique formula. Essentially, the game plays out as a hybrid of the classic arcade game Snek, mashed together into a much broader puzzle-based exploration game. Initially, this starts out with some fairly simple objectives, like avoiding obstacles as you navigate a room, or figuring out how to sneak up on potential prey so you can consume them in order to get the necessary length to hold down multiple switches connected to a door. That said, it's not long before the overall difficulty begins to ramp up, almost proportionately to your overall length. Soon enough, you'll find yourself needing to artfully navigate through rooms, ensuring that the entirety of your body is away from any doors that might snap shut and carve you in half, or spikes that might inopportunely skewer you as you attempt to fiddle with switches. And then further compounded by the plunderers, who will more than happily respond to being body blocked with brutal bifurcation. And I'll admit, this overall lethality, which also extends to booping your snoot into anything, is only further compounded by the game's movement style, since by default, the Snek is perpetually moving, which, in tandem with the very specific actions required to clear some of the chambers, is more than enough to rack up a fair number of cheap gotcha deaths. Which I think is a good time to bring up this game's accessibility options. There's a few here actually, and they all help to facilitate things. For instance, there's a Metronome Option, which lets you see the beat of the music and gives you an idea of how quickly Snek will slide over a tile, allowing you to properly gauge when you should turn, given you move in time with the music. That said, that pales in comparison to the other two options. One gives you the ability to pause at any checkpoint you reach, which generally allows you to take in the sights of the room you're about to enter. I say generally because there are lengthy segments without checkpoints, especially if you wind up backtracking, and there's just some really awkward camera angles in this game. More on that later. The important thing about this is it gives you the ability to take in the sight of the room and make meaningful decisions instead of panicking and dying. That said, the most powerful option is the ability to move one tile at a time. If you're having trouble keeping the pace or dealing with a section that relies heavily on memory, which there are a fair number, and yes, they basically all kill you instantly for failing because everything does, this can be a very powerful tool. That said, this feature does have its drawbacks, since even when moving one tile at a time, the Snek still does move in time with the beat, resulting in controls which can feel sluggish. Still, you can opt in or out of any of these features at any time by accessing the options menu, helping to tailor the overall difficulty of the game to some degree. Unfortunately, while these features help, there's certain elements of Snek's difficulty curve they can do little to mitigate. Height differences, for instance, are a very integral part of your Snek's journey, as there are countless times where you need to slither along stairs in order to loop under or over your body as your size continues to scale up. Unfortunately, it can be extremely difficult to properly gauge where your body is in relation to the ground, which can lead to countless retries due to gravity abruptly exerting itself and landing your body on its hazard possibly dozens of tiles beneath you. There's also little in the UI to signal whether or not you're above an obstacle, which can lead to frequent deaths, especially in areas that are dimly lit, and that's even if you scale the brightness to max, by the way. Even matters like your relation to your own body or a wall can become difficult to gauge, if only because you're frequently fighting a fixed camera angle, which is then made even worse when you factor in another element. While things start out in a relatively linear fashion, you'll soon start to get a bit more freedom as to where you can go. On one hand, this allows the developer to cache a few optional challenges to engage with, such as side content that allows players to earn collectibles for some achievements, and which thankfully stay acquired even if you die. And it also allows for some interesting puzzles involving navigating areas with a now larger body. On the other hand, this also lends itself to a lot of aimless wandering, since the game is somewhat vague about where you should actually be going. Your map helps to some degree, as it tends to denote the relative length you'll need to solve an important puzzle in a given area, but there's a small problem. It doesn't actually provide you tools to hint where you should go to achieve that length, or whether or not the puzzle you're trying to do is contingent on another room, or other rooms plural, which is something that happened to me late game. Also, the map is just potatoes in general, which not only contributes to roaming about the stages for vast swaths of time trying to figure out what to do, it can actually lead to you getting soft-locked, because there are no manual saves or even chapter selects, and while you can roll back your save file, there's a limited number of times you can do so, which is a problem if you say, become too large to successfully do a puzzle and have saved multiple times, or you happen to destroy destructible cracked tiles which blockaded you from progressing forward and happen to have saved the damage while you were aimlessly wandering through the temple. What's more, the position of enemies that spawn in from locations resets when you load from a save, which can actually lead to enemies that had passed you by instead respawning adjacent to you and killing you, despite the fact that you left them back several rooms ago, forcing you to roll back several minutes of progress to try and solve things. And in some cases, it might simply hinge on you not dying for several checkpoints until your 50+ length body has fully gotten out of the room, because they are just going to punish you by instantly killing you from their infinitely respawning door if you don't manage to get far enough away. A process, by the way, made especially hard by the conquistadors, as they can actually shoot you from more than a room's distance away provided they have line of sight on you. In fact, it was their presence that made a puzzle already complicated by my snakes at that point save locked length an utter mess, since it had effectively locked in the issues of not being able to fix a puzzle that relied on several rooms worth of puzzles. I mean, maybe I could rectify things by scything my serpent's length with a poorly explained late game mechanic, and I do mean poorly explained, since it never actually clearly tells you what's happening, but not only am I unsure of whether it would actually work, the possibility of saving that length chain in place and then needing to farm back a prodigious size is a nightmarish way to spend my time, and just a flagrant waste of it, and would still require me not to get sniped to death by the conquistadors. Anyways, a number of my gripes have already done a lot of the work for my describing the game's visuals, so I suppose the only thing I have to add is, despite those failings and the cheap deaths which ensued due to camera angles and the difficulty involved in distinguishing objects and their heights, I do think the game is fairly cute. I also appreciate the ability to swag out my snake with the Mecha Snek feature, one of the many chunks of optional content you can unlock by completing certain achievements in the game. For instance, check out this eye-searing Snecko right here. With the brightness turned up, this radiant nightmare could actually illuminate the otherwise murky waters of the temple. There's also this very thick, girthy, trouser snake wait, nope, please don't demonetize me, YouTube. Have this boater adjacent snake instead. Yeah, okay, I feel better. I can't say it makes up for all of the weird screen shenanigans that I've griped about, but it's something I appreciated at least. that and the music, actually. There's a pretty decent amount of it to listen to, and there's something genuinely interesting about the overall tempo matching the rate at which the snake moves. A detail which is actually more pertinent in the unlockable classic snake mode, since the music scales up to the speed you set the game at, and both dynamically changes and ramps up when you collect coins during a match. And then drastically ramps up if you happen to hit max size and the speed starts cranking. Here's the thing though, if it takes the aesthetics section for me to really provide any sort of praise for a game, that should maybe be a bit telling. For a game that is apparently meant to be around 5 to 7 hours maybe, I found myself stuck scouring the temple grounds for something like 17 hours, frequently finding myself lost for ages, repeating incredibly finicky puzzles, sometimes entailing restarting several rooms from scratch after making a single mistake, as well as dying to the occasional gotcha kaizo trap moment, where a victory still leads you to dying because maybe they just have an enemy that spawns on the other side of the gate that you just opened and attack your exposed body while you can't do anything about it. Oh, and just plain rolling back Sway's progress is just fucking soul crushing. That's it. That's all there is to it. It's not even the repeating the saves part in itself. You're repeating the puzzles anyways, just because you're occasionally going several rooms without a save point, or just having horrible luck in a single room, but actually having to undo that progress is awful. That's not to say I hate this game exactly. I actually had a fair bit of fun with the early portions of it. But the further I got into its labyrinthine guts, the more I began to resent it. Some of that is likely on me. I do have poor memory, and lengthy twitchy reflex segments involving a lot of memorization or on-the-fly adjustment can be a pain. And while I could sit on one tile at a time mode, it was both ponderous and didn't really solve the whole memory thing. Neither did the hint system, for that matter. Like, it could help for nudging me on the right direction, but the hints don't really linger, and they also don't necessarily align if the puzzle you're solving requires fiddling with multiple rooms, or particular lengths, which instead had me figuring out some alternate solutions. That said, even without my memory issues, there were so many design decisions that ultimately made this a painful and unpleasant experience that drained the enthusiasm I once had for it and turned the last handful of hours into a painstaking slog of hard-earned progress that finally turned into dead-ended despair. Which is to say, I'm not sure I could recommend this to someone, even a fan of classic Snake, because while you can unlock that in this game, you can also just play that online, and sure, having a level editor is neat, but the core experience of the game is just, it's a fail, a flawed experience which gradually compounds its failings until it's the only thing left to define its late game experience. Making this notable as one of the few games on this channel I threw in the towel for, after a grueling 17 hours, which yes, that's why we're tackling a matter of the ending after the gameplay. It's because I never saw it. Anywho, thanks for tuning in. If you agree, disagree, or just have something to say to me, feel free to comment. And if you enjoy my efforts to create new indie reviews, interviews, and gaming content, hit the subscribe button and the bell. For the Discord savvy folks, there's a link to my community, the Crit Hit Cauldron, in the video description, and to my Patrons who can support me and the other members of Crit Hit. And I'm just going to make a quick shout out here to our good boy Shrimp Mania for being our first honorary Patreon subscriber. Thank you. Thank you, sir. Also to my Twitch, if you just want to see me get dunked on in indie games live. That said, I'll catch you on the next episode of Crit Hit. Take care till then, folks.